Okay, this is part one of our 2017 Baltic Cruise on the Regal Princess. In this part we will visit Copenhagen, Denmark, Oslo, Norway, and Berlin, Germany. First I'm going to show you the itinerary we followed on this part of the trip. We started off in Copenhagen and then we cruised up to Oslo, Norway overnight. Then we had a one-day cruise to get down to Warnemünde, Germany. Then on an excursion we took the train to Berlin, spent the day there, and then took the train back to Warnemünde. The trip started with the air, obviously, and we had a kind of a long route to go. We went from Los Angeles to Boston, and we spent the night there to kind of get rested up. Then the next morning we flew to Reykjavik, Iceland, got in there at about 1 o'clock in the morning their time. Then we flew to Copenhagen, Denmark, arriving at 6 o'clock in the morning on July 26. We were met at the airport by a princess representative and driven to our hotel. So this is Copenhagen. We spent 2 full days there and got to revisit many of the sites we saw on our last trip there, including The Little Mermaid from the story by Hans Christian Andersen, Rosenborg Castle, the Statens Art Museum, the Royal Library, aka the Black Diamond, the train station, the changing of the guard at the Amalienborg Palace, the Copenhagen City Hall, and then there was the bicycles, bicycles everywhere, and the statue of Hans Christian Andersen, who is looking across the street at the Tivoli Gardens, which is one of the world's first amusement parks. Walt Disney used it as the primary inspiration for Disneyland. We also got to see some new things on this trip, including the Round Tower, which is Europe's oldest functioning observatory. To reach the top, you have to climb this spiral staircase. So here's some video that I shot from the top of the Round Tower to give you an idea about the size of Copenhagen, which is the capital of Denmark. Copenhagen was originally a Viking fishing village. It was founded in the 11th century. Another first for us on this trip was taking the harbor cruise. In his running narration, our guide repeated each commentary 3 times in 3 different languages. The cruise started and ended in a section of Copenhagen called Nyhavn. The entire cruise took about 90 minutes. The cruise went under many bridges. Some of the bridges had only a few feet of clearance between the water and the bottom of the bridge, which allowed us to touch the underside of those bridges. During the cruise, we got to see many of the sights of Copenhagen. For example, we saw the German church, which is also called the Marble Church. We also saw the Copenhagen Opera House, which is much bigger than it looks from the outside because it has 9 levels and many of them are under the water level. While we enjoyed seeing buildings and monuments, we enjoyed seeing everyday elements of Copenhagen life more. For example, after we got off the boat, we walked to this restaurant for dinner, then we walked back to the hotel and packed for the following day. The next morning we boarded the Regal Princess, the most striking feature of which is the sea walk. Our cabin was one of the nicest we've ever had. We set sail at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and after an overnight cruise we arrived in Oslo, Norway on July 28th. So here is Oslo. The brown building there is the Oslo City Hall, and in the upper left-hand corner is the Royal Palace of Norway. We had to cruise through some of the Norwegian fjords to get into Oslo, so we didn't get there until around 10 o'clock in the morning. In the distance you can see the Oslo City Hall with the two spires. We're going to go into that later. Then we are still coming into dock here, where we are still maneuvering to get into the place that we're going to dock. And over to the right is a little pier that is the home of the three-masted sailing ship called the Christian Radich, which was in a 1958 movie called Windjammer. I had hoped to see the Radich, but it was not in port on this day. Here's a picture of the Radich when it's in port. The first thing we did was visit the Oslo Opera House. It was designed to look like an iceberg, right down to how the concrete goes into the water. People can walk all over the building, including on the roof. This was shot from the base of the Opera House. And here is the Opera House itself. This again is shot from the Opera House, and you can see the top of the Regal Princess from here. This is called Karl Johan Street. It's their primary shopping street. No cars are allowed to drive on it. You can see how gorgeous the day was. It was really a joy to walk down this street. We went up and we had lunch, of course, at McDonald's. Towards the end of the Karl Johan Street is this park. They had this most unusual fountain that Robin and I had ever seen. It was just unbelievably gorgeous. I wish that I had shot video of it. At the end of Karl Johan Street is the Royal Palace. And they don't have tours of the Royal Palace, so we couldn't go inside. But we certainly had a lot of fun walking up there and looking around at all of the things that there are outside of the palace. You can see the flag is flying over the palace. That means that the royal family is in residence that day. I took this shot from the palace looking back down Karl Johan Street. It's really further down Karl Johan than it looks because the street curves around to the left down there. Just before we arrived at the palace, we saw this guy making the largest bubbles we have ever seen. As you can see, he was a kid magnet. After the Balloon Man, we walked to the palace and watched the changing of the guard. I think just about every European capital has this kind of a ceremony. As the soldiers pass, do you notice something different about one of the soldiers? I'm going to pause it here. The one that's nearest to the camera is a woman. We thought that was kind of interesting. After we watched the changing of the guard, we walked to the area behind the palace. It was a public park called Dronningparken. It used to be a private sanctuary for the royal family. As you can see, it was a very, very, very beautiful area. Really nice. A lot of people having picnics and everything. It is really very, very, very beautiful. After that, we went to the Oslo City Hall. And here's what it looks like on the inside. The area under the balcony is where they confer the annual Nobel Peace Prize, and here is our President Obama when he got his Nobel Peace Prize. Next, we left Oslo and had a day cruise to Warnemünde, Germany on July 30th. This is what it looks like on the morning that we arrived in Warnemünde. Very gorgeous day, but it turned out to be a very hot and muggy day. So we went on an excursion, and the excursion first had us get on a train and ride from Warnemünde into Berlin, which was the city that we wanted to see. This is a shot of Berlin. In the right corner is the Brandenburg Gate, and to the left is the Reichstag. This is a square that the Nazis used in 1933 to do their big book burning. This is a memorial that the Berliners have made that is designed to make a comment on that. Through the glass you can see empty bookshelves. At the other end of the square is Humboldt University. That's where Einstein taught and where Karl Marx was a student. The next thing is the Soviet-built TV tower. They built this during the Cold War, but they were really stymied because there was a naturally occurring cross on the ball of that, which really infuriated the Soviets because they were so opposed to anything religious. The Berliner Dome inside was really striking. It was just unbelievable. The things that we saw there took our breath away. It's a relatively small church on the inside, but it's done up so lavishly it was just breathtaking. Next we walked from the Berliner Dome at the bottom of the screen to the Brandenburg Gate marked with a number 1 in the upper part of the screen. Then to the Reichstag marked with a number 2, a combined distance of over a mile. We had tickets to see the Reichstag, but they were for 1:30 and it was 1:20, which forced us to walk the mile in 10 minutes in the heat and humidity. Here is the Reichstag, which houses the German government. After we got into the building, we walked up to the top of the glass dome on top of the building using a spiral ramp, which you can see here from inside the dome. Note the glass column on the right. It was very, very hot that day, and it was even hotter inside of the dome. There was no air conditioning at all. This guard kept giving Robin and I the evil eye, but we never figured out why. Right here I'm scanning down that glass column you saw earlier. At the bottom of it is a glass ceiling under which the members of Germany's government meet. Here is a picture through the glass. And here is the Brandenburg Gate, the number 1 symbol of Germany and Berlin. Where that black car is parked in that semicircle there going around the corner, that's where the old Berlin Wall was during the Cold War. You could not walk across that to get to the Brandenburg Gate. Now this is something that was interesting. This is something called the Amplaman. It was designed and used in East Berlin by the Soviets. After the Cold War, the German government wanted to scrap the Amplaman, but the citizens voted to keep it, the only Soviet symbol kept in the reunified Berlin. Getting back to the Brandenburg Gate, this view of the gate is the most famous and the most associated with Berlin, but it is really the back side of the gate. Here is the other side, which is really the front of the Brandenburg Gate. To the right you can see the dome of the Reichstag. Then we went to see the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe, And this is the area that was on top of the museum. The museum was really underground, and this part of it was just a bunch of stone monoliths of varying sizes. There were no names on any of the monoliths. Under this parking lot is the site of Hitler's bunker. This was where he spent his last days and where he supposedly committed suicide. The bunker is still down there. Next, we went to see one of the 2 remaining guard towers, built to shoot East Berliners trying to escape to the west. And now we come to the Trabant. This is the car that the East Germans built under the Soviet influence, and it was always seen as the worst automobile that was ever made anywhere in the history of the world. It was terrible. It was just the worst car that you can imagine. So the Berliners have made a little museum to give it a kind of a false honor. Now we come to one of the last remaining sections of the Berlin Wall. You can see kind of how it was built and everything. This part up on the top there was rounded, so it would be harder to throw something over to climb the wall. Right opposite the wall is the Museum of Terror. This was built on the former site of the SS, the German secret police. And this was the last place that we visited in Berlin. It's called Checkpoint Charlie. This was the main thoroughfare between East and West Berlin during the Cold War. From there we caught the train back to Warnemünde. But if you notice, Robin has her legs elevated. This was because we ended up walking 11 miles around Berlin, which made Robin's legs and feet swell so badly she had to see the ship's doctor twice on the way to our next stop, which was Tallinn, Estonia.